The horse was lying by the side of the road like a piece of garbage. Its thin body showed weeks, maybe months of neglect. Bones protruded from the dirty skin, marked by open wounds and hardened scabs. But the worst thing wasn't hunger or thirst. It was what covered every inch of his body. Thousands of ticks were stuck to him, piled on top of each other in grotesque layers, as if they were a second skin. His eyes, which might once have sparkled, were now dull, washed out. He no longer expected anything. There was no hope. Every movement, no matter how small, caused pain. The weight of the parasites sapped his energy. His hooves were cracked, his legs trembled. His breathing was weak, irregular. If someone didn't do something soon, he would no longer have the strength to breathe. But the worst had already happened. He had been abandoned. He wasn't a wild animal. He belonged to someone. And that someone, instead of helping him, decided it was easier to let him die alone. As if his life wasn't even worth the effort of one last look. It was a truck driver who saw him first. He was driving along the highway when he noticed a figure standing motionless on the shoulder. Something inside him made him stop. Perhaps it was the eerie silence of the scene. Perhaps it was the feeling that this animal shouldn't be there. When he got out of the truck and approached it, his heart squeezed. The smell of rot and dried blood filled the air. He had never seen anything like it. The infestation was monstrous. The horse wasn't moving, but it was alive. Weak, defeated, breathing only because its body had not yet given up. The truck driver knew he couldn't leave him there. He took out his cell phone and started calling everywhere. Calls to NGOs, vets, anyone who could help. The answer was almost always the same. We can't afford it. There's nothing we can do. It's too late. But he refused to accept that. Not after seeing that horse so close to the end. After many attempts, he finally got in touch with a small animal shelter. They said they would send help, but that the rescue would take a few hours. And there, next to that animal that didn't even have the strength to lift its head, he waited. The scorching sun burned his skin, but the horse didn't even react. Flies buzzed around the open wounds, landing on him as if they were already feeding on a dead body. The truck driver took a bucket of water from the truck and tried to offer it to him. Nothing. His dry lips didn't even move. With his bare hands, he poured some water into the animal's mouth, trying to cool it down. And then for the first time, a small sign of life, a slight twitch in its nostril, as if it were still there. As if, deep down, it still wanted to fight. Hours later, when the rescue team arrived, the scene they found was devastating. A horse on the brink of death, covered in parasites, abandoned to slowly wither away. They didn't know if it would be possible to save him. But they had to try. The first step was to remove the ticks. A delicate job that would require patience and care, because every wrong move could be the last. The rescue began right there, on the side of the road. Time was a cruel enemy. Every second that passed was one less second to save that horse. The team brought tweezers, medication, and even blades to cut out the tufts of ticks that seemed to be stuck in his skin. But as soon as they started removing the first few, they realized that the situation was even worse than it seemed. Many ticks were so deeply buried that pulling them out meant opening wounds that bled nonstop. The horse, even without strength, shuddered in pain. His body could no longer fight off the invasion that was mercilessly sucking his blood. Each member of the team had a role to play. While some pulled out the parasites, others tried to hydrate the animal. Water was carefully poured into its mouth, and although it didn't react initially, it gradually began to swallow small amounts. It was little, but it was a sign. A sign that maybe, just maybe, there was a chance. But the ticks were still a huge problem. The smaller ones were removed with tweezers, but the big ones, swollen with blood, were pulled out with hands covered in thick gloves. And with each removal, a trickle of blood flowed out, as if the horse's own body was already giving up on containing the damage. The decision was made. He needed to be transported to the clinic as soon as possible. A mild sedative was applied so that he wouldn't suffer so much during the journey. But another problem arose. He was too weak to stand up on his own. If he stayed there any longer, maybe even transportation wouldn't help. They needed something to support him. Using straps and a lot of strength, the volunteers teamed up to lift that exhausted body. It was an effort that demanded everything of them. The horse trembled, almost collapsed again, but somehow managed to stay upright, supported by those who wouldn't give up on him. The ride to the clinic was tense. Any sudden movement could be fatal for such a weakened body. All the way, one of the vets kept his hand on his neck, feeling his pulse weaken, as if at any moment that heart could simply stop. But the horse was still there, breathing, struggling. Even though it didn't understand what was happening, even after being abandoned to die, it still clung to what little life it had left. When he arrived at the clinic, the battle had only just begun. The tests confirmed what everyone feared. He was severely anemic due to the infestation. His blood had been sucked by thousands of parasites for so long that his organs were already showing signs of failure. Treatment needed to be immediate. But the question was, could he take it? The vet looked at the team and couldn't hide the uncertainty in his eyes. Everything depended on the next few hours. The next few hours were a silent struggle between life and death. The horse, named Esperanza by the team, was lying in a stall, receiving IVs, blood transfusions, and pain-relieving medication. His gaze was distant, as if his soul was ready to leave, but his body still resisted. The vet monitored every faint beat of his heart, aware that any change could mean the end. The volunteers took turns to stay by his side, whispering words of comfort, waiting for a sign that he still wanted to fight. But time passed and he didn't react. His body, consumed by severe anemia and trauma, seemed to be giving up. Then it happened. In the silence of the night, when almost everyone feared the worst, one of the volunteers felt a light touch on her leg. It was Esperanca's head. He who until then hadn't even had the strength to lift his neck was there, looking for contact. The team was overcome with emotion. Tears flowed. It was a mute plea for help, proof that, despite everything, he still wanted to live. When the vet saw the scene, he knew he had to act fast. If there was a spark of life in that body, he would do everything he could to rekindle the fire. The treatment was intensified. More transfusions, supplements, special food administered with care. Every small improvement was celebrated as a victory. But the challenge wasn't over yet. In the early hours of the morning, his body went into shock. Her legs trembled, her eyes rolled back for a few seconds, and her breathing became irregular. Despair gripped everyone. The vet applied emergency medication, massaged his chest, and tried to stimulate his breathing. Time seemed to stand still. It was now or never. Minutes later, the crisis passed. Esperanza's heart stabilized. He was still alive. He was still there. But that was a warning. His recovery would not be easy. He would need strength to carry on. He would need to fight harder than ever. And above all, he would need to feel that he was not alone. The volunteers understood this and promised to stay with him until the end. The question hanging in the air was, would he be able to take the next step? Would he ever be able to get up and run free again? The days passed, and every little bit of progress Esperanza made was celebrated as a great achievement. The blank stare gradually gave way to a discreet, almost imperceptible glow, but one that showed he was still there. The first major milestone came when, with effort, he managed to stand on his front paws. It wasn't easy. His body was still shaking, his legs felt like glass, but he tried. And he tried again. Until one sunny morning, in front of the emotional eyes of the team, Esperanca stood up completely. The scene was overwhelming. The horse that had been abandoned, consumed by ticks, and on the verge of death, was now standing. There was no longer any doubt. He wanted to live. The recovery was long, but every day was a step towards freedom. The ticks had been eliminated, his wounds treated, his strength gradually returning, until the most awaited moment arrived. The gate was opened and Esperanca, now healthy, took her first steps towards a pasture. At first, he hesitated. But then, as if something inside him had awakened, he ran. He ran as if he wanted to leave behind every day of suffering, every moment of pain. It was as if, at that moment, he had finally found what he had been denied for so long, a chance to start again. Today, Esperanza lives in a sanctuary, surrounded by other horses and people who have never given up on him. His story is not just about survival, but about resilience, about how even in the darkest moments, the spark of life can endure and turn into something great. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson of all. There is always hope, even when all seems lost. Just for those of you who like a good story and have watched to the end, leave your comment below from which city you're watching, and I'll leave a heart in your comment. Bye, and see you in the next video.